Thank you for joining us, Elaine, and thank you
Yeah,
for that film.
thank you for having me.
Yeah, I would like to just start off by welcoming you to this filming, this talk at Asia Society, and to thank Asia Society for having us and hosting this screening.
Absolutely.
King Cole is really so much more than a documentary. It is this fable that you've created and crafted, bringing together choreography, sound, uh, almost magical realism, and these different visions. Can you talk a little bit about the approach that you took to this subject that you're otherwise bringing in archival footage and might in another filmmaker's hands have been kind of a traditional documentary, and how you thought about making this movie?
Yeah, sure. Well, it started out probably more traditional, which is that I started by documenting Cole culture. So those things that I knew were disappearing, the pageants, the classroom education, the things that I knew about from growing up in the coal fields. And that's just purely how it started from an observational point of view. And then as a filmmaker, I was immersing myself into all the other films that have been made about this topic and what they did well and what they sort of missed, or didn't cover, and was sort of thinking about what I could add to the conversation that currently wasn't being had. And I think what's been covered really well is the environmental impact, the political implications, the historical impact, the presence of the union, and how much effect that's had on the nation. So there's a lot of history and really incredible films out there of this topic. And so why make this film now? And so, one thing I feel like it's missing in the conversation is the very human, messy side of this. The things that we often don't see represented in the media through a headline or through, just a journalist stopping into Appalachia for 3 days. And so that's the personal, ritualistic, messy, cultural side that acknowledges that people are constantly in a state of change and that we're not in this fixed way that we think of one another, especially in the coal fields. And I wanted the film to be more reflexive in not just documenting what is, but potentially allowing the film to be a place to dream for what could be without making it too solution driven. Like it wasn't a easy solution like coal for solar or coal for wind, but instead is more about the transition of the human psyche and the soul as we come out of this. Because I do think it's something that we really miss understanding why extraction regions struggle to move forward, and why they're so left out of the conversation is because the cultural elements left out. And so, incorporating magical realism and choreography and all that, it was all an effort to make a documentary that wasn't just about what we see, but what we feel. And so I had to call upon cinematic techniques that aren't usually in documentaries. But I knew I didn't really know what the film was when I was making it. None of us did. But I knew from the beginning I did want it to be, I didn't want it to be interviews. I didn't want it to be didactic. I didn't want it to be necessarily driven by facts and figures, because I just don't think that conversation is, different groups are hearing it differently. And so I wanted to appeal to sort of all sides of the spectrum of understanding whole as a touchstone, for lack of a better word, in our, as we go beyond coal, as like sort of our underpinnings of this industrial society, post-industrial society we live in.
Thank you. Sort of jumping off of that, one of the recurring themes is obviously the ghost of King Cole and this ritual and notion of a haunting by Cole and by King Cole. That almost stands side by side with something that I think is sort of unsaid in the film, and maybe in more common portrayals, is this idea of nostalgia. Do you
Mm-hmm.
think about a difference between sort of a haunting and a nostalgia, and how that affects or kind of manifests in coal country?
Yeah. Well, hunting for me is something, it's unfinished business. So that's what King Cole represents, is not necessarily the industry or an industrialist or even a miner, but King Cole being made up of the body of the people who have um, made the industry work, right? And how that has become so much a part of their lives beyond a job, and how when that job actually started to disappear, the king himself took a different role, which was one that had to become a different part of their life in order to maintain power. And so, I'm sorry, can you repeat your question again? I had a great answer,
Oh,
and I started
yes,
on.
thinking about haunting and
Yeah,
nostalgia.
nostalgia, right? Thank you. So the haunting thing was, it's an ironic film because when we were making it during COVID, coal prices were at their highest in history, and it's also something to be said that a lot of the coal that's mined where I'm from in West Virginia and in Appalachia is metallurgical coal. It's used to make steel, not power generation, right? So we still see a very strong coal market in that capacity. And so it felt a little ironic at times to say the king's dead and he's a ghost haunting us when coal prices were at all-time high. And what was really important to us is that we weren't saying your job is dead or this industry as a whole. We weren't making that comment. We were saying this story is dead. The story is something we're dragging around with us, that's haunting us, that's holding us back from realizing a new potential, a new way to live in this world. And instead of seeing that as a nostalgic yearning for the past, we're able to actually see that as an opportunity to step into a new identity and new future. And so for me, nostalgia becomes deadly when it only orients you towards the past. But what we wanted the film to do was recognize what's worked for us in the past, the history, and the generational learning, but also orient us through a lens of these two young girls and youth to think about the future. So that's my grandpa, my papa that's in the film. And, he's actually a grave digger. And so like the whole burial ritual side, while it's, part performance in the film, it also is very much a part of culture and not one that we do much anymore. And so I thought, is it interesting to look to the past for ways to move into the future? And so I was just interested in sort of teasing out the fact that we think of history as being marching steadily towards progress, that everything in the past is irrelevant and everything of the future will be better. And I actually think it's a little bit more complicated than that, that actually some of the things that are really good for the environment and for people's health are things that we've done in the past that we've forgotten about. And so it's not really a nostalgia for a return of something, but an acknowledgement of what's worked and what hasn't, and very clear-eyed approach about how to move forward with new ideas.
What are some of the news stories or sort of tensions in the news stories coming in as the story of coal starts to kind of take that environmental turn away from being the pinnacle of something to be necessarily proud of and something that is part of your family's legacy towards something where the primary story is of environmental concern?
Yeah.
Obviously, you've got people talking about solar and wind, and what are those new stories coming in? Are they resonating? And yeah, I'll let you take
Yeah.
it from there.
It's generational. I think the one thing I'll say is that one of the reasons why we really wanted to send our kids is we did feel from the early doc footage that we were shooting, kids are being handed this story and it's not often very relevant to them or relatable. When those kids in the classroom ask, what's that? And it's a piece of coal and they're touching it and they're like, oh, it feels like diamonds. Those are kids that live in the state of West Virginia, which, as a kid growing up, I knew what coal looked like. So like that generational gap already is one that exists. And so we've already seen the story run its course. This is not this generation's sort of source of pride. So it's already run its course. So there's that generational gap between the history that's being taught and what it means for the future. But then I see, things like Solar Holler, that's an incredible group across Appalachia. And, they're working with high schools to do internships and apprenticeships with high school students where these are students that would be attending technical college or doing other things like welding. And so they're putting them to work, learning how to install solar, and they're paying them and they're graduating with ready to work in those jobs in the solar industry. And I think that what's really important about that is they're working in the coal fields with communities that have generations of coal miners in their family. I mean, we're filming a short film about this now, but one of those kids, his dad drives a train or is a conductor for CSX who hauls coal, right? And his son is one of the guys who's learning to install solar and will be graduating in May. And have a job with a solar installer. And so it's not like people are there. There's this perception that people in Appalachia just don't want anything to change and that they're not open to it. The fact is, a lot of the proposed changes that have been brought to Appalachia have sort of been a slap in the face to the people who have sacrificed their own land, their own environment, their own health to provide wealth and progress for other places. And yet we've stayed quite behind and quite poor in that situation. And so when the solution is, you know, a job that pays $10 an hour versus a mining job where, you know, straight out of high school you can do your hourly training as a miner and start making $65,000, $70,000 a year, I think it's a good living in West Virginia. So it's not as if people want coal jobs. They want jobs at home where they can stay, where their family networks are, where they're very drawn to where they live, the mountains and the streams and all the things that are part of their life. And so I think the perception is that people don't want to change and that they just want coal. That just happens to be the job that's paid really well there. And there's been absolutely no real push beyond sort of in the nonprofit sector, which is all grant driven and has short deadlines. Like there's no long-term vision about what we're going to do with this workforce and retraining the workforce. So when I see things like Solar Hollow working with young people, I think that that's really inspiring because it's through those young people that we talk to the older generation about this, because they want the kids to be successful. They don't want them to have to leave if they don't want to leave. If they want to leave, that's fine. But so I think that those things are really important. It's not a matter of a top-down approach, but it's looking at sort of this more grassroots approach of what does a community need and how do they make a living close to home. And, you know, this isn't just an issue in Appalachia. The economic workforce of our entire country is changing. I mean, and this started mechanization and the mining started changing things in the 70s. This has been a long time coming. So I'm hopeful, but I do think change takes a long time. And we need to be more patient and listen to one another more deeply.
Thank you. One quick kind of final question from me, and then I'd love to open it up to the audience. I'm just curious, obviously, this is a story that you open with, that you're kind of the idea of not talking about or saying anything bad about King Coal and still learning that lesson. This debuted at Sundance last year in 2023. I'm wondering if you've had any reactions or sort of how that conversation has continued with your friends and family and community.
Yeah, the film's played all across my home state of West Virginia, but also across the coal fields. We had a sold out 400 people plus screening in the state capital of Charleston, and it's screened in the coal fields as part of a high school program. And it's really resonating with people. I mean, certainly there are moments of the film that are challenging for certain folks, if maybe they're still employed in the industry or maybe they're laid off and hoping to be reemployed, I think. But there's enough in there for this tension, balancing this tension between loyalty and truth, between future and past. I mean, the film is so much about balancing all these things that are presented usually as like, you're either this or you're that. You're either pro environment or pro coal, which is just not true. Like all the people that live there are on this spectrum, right? And so I think I've been really amazed at the capacity of a film to not necessarily be like, okay, here's the film and we're going to tell you all the solutions and that's it. But this film has created a space for contemplation. And because it's so different, and because people come to a film like King Coal thinking, you know, it's going to be interviews or, you know, Joe Manchin's going to be mentioned or something, right? Like they have this like talking points about coal and politics, and it's not that film, that it really takes people a little bit off guard when they're not from Appalachia. And then the people from Appalachia see a part of the region they love so deeply that they don't often get to see depicted on screen. I mean, most of us from Appalachia are used to being depicted as poor, uneducated, you know, literally like the bottom of the barrel, right? Like that's been the American depiction of the place I'm from. And so there's we all feel the tension of sort of this love-hate relationship with the region, even if you've chosen to stay. And so it really deeply resonates with saying things that people don't feel the privilege to be able to say sometimes. And I really wanted the film to be able to do that. So So far, so good. We have a broadcast on PBS POV nationally in June, but everything, it's been a real conversation opener. I mean, certainly, I'm sure there's people on both sides that are unwilling to change opinions, but I've been really amazed at the capacity for communities to bring this film to their community and have the hard conversation. For example, it played at the King Coal Festival, which is the place where they throw fake coal dust on you at the, it's not real dust, it's like a black cornstarch on the 5K. And so they were so excited to bring it to Williamson and showed it there. So, coalfields communities are not, they're part of the conversation. I mean, this film is coming out of the fact that they are having these conversations. It's not necessarily this film that's the only one starting them.
Thank you. And you do an incredible job of just representing how beautiful everything is in the region. So that also, I think, is a real takeaway. Yeah, I would love to open it up to the audience for questions. It's so bright, I really can't see anyone here. But I know Claudia, I think, has a microphone over there. Does anyone have a question for Elaine? Perfect.
Hello. Hi. Beautiful film. Also love the Solar Holler shout out. My company works with them, so it's exciting to hear them. Yeah, I guess living in New York City, I don't want to generalize about the audience, but my assumption is that most of us have quite a disconnect from the energy sources that we depend on. And I think it's very humbling and humanizing to see the people behind these energy sources, or to your point, for steel as well. I'm wondering, living in such an urban environment here in New York City, what your thoughts are on like how New Yorkers can better be allies to more rural communities that we may not quite understand, but might be more quick to judge. And how can we elevate that more in conversation when we're dealing with these kind of big, hairy, national campaigns to hopefully divest from fossil fuels, from coal, et cetera? How can we leverage more empathy in these conversations?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of really, this film's just one of many films trying to show a more nuanced view of Appalachia. So I'm thinking even of books like What You're Getting Wrong About Appalachia, or books like Ramp Hollow, or the work of Mary Hufford, who's a folklorist I think it was in the 80s or 90s. She did this incredible work that's all available in the Library of Congress, where she talked with people that lived in the coal fields about the concept of the commons and tending to the commons. And I think just recognizing that, I guess, taking a pause before there's shorthand for people. And, it is still shocking to me. And this isn't just something exclusive to when I'm in New York, but it is shocking to me how quickly we are to use shorthand for one another, whether that's, calling people Trumpers or whatever it might be, without even knowing that that's true, right? And I think avoiding shorthand is really helpful in actually trying to figure out what's going on behind the scenes. And we do that through reading, we do that through listening. There's great podcasts like Black in Appalachia, which do an incredible job at telling stories that nobody's told. Black by God Media is a wonderful resource too, subscribing to their print issue. I think supporting people who are like financially supporting this long-term vision. So, being an ally with Solar Holler and those people that are invested in the region, coming to visit, like supporting our state tourism is huge. I mean, it's a state that very much needs people to come from elsewhere to appreciate the beauty in order so we can rally to have people maintain it. Because, there are forces in our state that don't necessarily think tourism is something that should be valued over, finding a new natural gas pipeline or doing whatever, right? So like emphasizing that. The New River Gorge is a place that was just established a national park. So there's a lot of ways that you can bring yourself into the conversation. But mostly I think I would just ask people just to, if they have a knee-jerk reaction about a group of people, replace that group of people, whether it's Appalachian, with any other label about other people, and ask if you would say the same thing and give another group a fair shake, and maybe reflect on how your perceptions of Appalachia have been colored by political forces. I mean, there's been a real intentional campaign since the war on poverty, which was very well intentioned, to make Appalachia seem like a place that needs saved, to be seen as a place that needs rescued and can't help itself. And the story on the ground is, yes, of course, there's challenges, but there's so many people doing incredible work. Even, I made a film about the opioid crisis and focused on 3 women on the front lines, and it's called Heroin. It's on Netflix. And I think about that film and how many people were just surprised to see locals responding to this, right? And I think just trying to take a beat when you hear something, to really think about, if we're using shorthand, to think of one another and visit and meet people and get closer to the issues and the people.
Down there in front.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Taylor. I'm a volunteer with the Climate Film Festival, and I'm really excited to be here and be a part of this evening. My question is kind of relating to some things we touched upon around the community aspect, but then also your kind of moments of nostalgia. And I wonder how those kind of pieces, because I know it's quite the tapestry when all of these ideas are being thrown at you, how did that then come to inform the kind of narrative that the young girl was speaking over top of the film, but then also kind of these the narrative throughout the entire film?
Yeah. So the narrators, it's actually me, and I'm talking about my own childhood. So all that's nonfiction and my own storytelling of sort of my relationship to place, with help from my awesome contributing writers who edited the heck out of me to help me clarify my feelings about these things. And Lainey, the redhead, I refer to her in my narration. I say things like, I don't remember the day I learned I lived under the king. She won't either. And Lainey, in some ways, is, I'm projecting onto her because her childhood is very different than mine, but it also things haven't changed so much, right? And then the final scene with King Cole's memorial, or the funeral, that came out of a recognition that this film wasn't going to be this solutions-driven film that we typically think of with Cole necessarily, but it was going to be one that was going to be more about grief and mourning. And that sounds very strange when you're not from there, but it resonated very deeply with people. And we had, I think I'm frozen. We had 70 people show up at the King Cole funeral to express their own eulogies. And the eulogy that's given by Heather Hanna, who's a singer-songwriter, at the end of the film, she wrote 10 minutes before we walked up the hill. We didn't know what she was going to say. And when she was delivering her speech, it was unbelievable because it was right in line with all the writing I had been doing for 2 years. And she was writing the end of the film live right in front of us. And it was a really incredible moment where the narrative was coming together in a way that was, yes, in some ways staged, this funeral staged, but everything that happened in that memorial was spontaneous. It was what people wanted to come up and say. And the film was, it felt so, there's always a fear of making a personal film that it's just going to be your experience. But when Heather was giving that speech, it was so clear this is not just my experience, and that those 70 people on top of that hilltop had a reason for being there, and felt very comforted by this community that gathered to do this thing. And in many ways, we were just taking from what we were learning from what Cole communities do with Cole. Like, we were just creating a new ritual through the act of filmmaking in this memorial. So the narrative came full circle when Heather Hanna showed up and basically stated the narration that we had been writing all along. And it was truly unbelievable. It was pure magic. And then we went back through the narration, and Heather she was very instructive in the sense that she was speaking from the first person. And for many for a long time, this film was not written from the perspective of myself, from first person perspective. And her speech was really what put us over the edge of thinking about that narrative and how it pulls you through. So yeah, memory making, looking back to my own memories, Gabby's grandma, who's, saying, all the things that happened to her family, but they can't take my memories. I mean, Heather referring to, first it was the timber, then the gas, and now they've come to mind the stories, mind the magic, mind the memories. And it was just, none of those things were scripted. And it was really, really a way of like tapping into a community's way of understanding this. And it's just pretty unbelievable how it all came together. It wasn't like we had a script and we went out and shot the film. It was all sort of a call and response with the community.
Do one final question here. Oh, down in.
Hi, Elaine. Thank you so much. I have been lucky to be able to watch this film before, and tonight it continues to catch my breath, which is precisely what I want to ask you about, which is this sensorial, embodied nature that you're able to so adeptly weave into this work in so many ways, from the sonic elements, the luscious cinematography, the dance, of course, and everything in between. And I know you mentioned already tonight the desire to not just focus on facts and numbers and to move the conversation into what we feel. And so my question is just if you have anything else that you might like to add, put on the table tonight in that regard, not just feeling psychologically, emotion, but also feeling that is actually embedded in the body. And my last thing is there's something that struck me tonight that I had forgotten from my first watch, which is you mentioned that people who have been working in the mines, they themselves being so close to death on various occasions, they have a more finely attuned attachment or engagement with the world. And I thought that was such a beautiful kind of moment that I'll take away tonight. So just if you have anything to add in that embodied sensorial nature.
Thank you for that question, and thanks for watching the film twice. Well, the first shout out has to go to Shodake Talaferro, who's a breath artist who, when you're watching this film, you may not be aware, but many of the sounds you were hearing were made by his human voice. And so the sound of crickets and thunder and wind and many of these little sounds were actually him. So some of them were sound effects, but a lot of them were him. And he's just he comes from beatboxing, and he's just an incredible artist. And we were able to work with him to create basically a sound kit of his breath art. And one of the things I really thought was really profound about a human making these sounds is when we think of breath and breath culture in this region, we see high asthma rates in communities with coal-fired power plants. We see black lung disease as something that still haunts us. And this is also a region that's been referred to as the lungs of the East Coast, that if it weren't for the dense forests of the lesser developed parts of Appalachia, which is mostly where I'm from, then the Eastern Seaboard couldn't breathe, right? Like it's up to those forests. And so there's a lot of commentary on breath culture already within this region. And I felt like Shodake was just an extra step into that. The dance, when I worked with Celia Ralston Hall, she's a really talented choreographer. I asked her, I said, can you tell a story with a dance? And can we make a professional dance that looks like a kid could have made it? And that was the real goal of that. And so there's so much storytelling in the motions. So this merging of past and present, and the two worlds. We always thought of this film as having two worlds. The reaching for sort of like what's unknown, and then the moments of actually like interacting with the environment. So there's parts where Elaine will pick up rocks or mud and spin and throw them. So thinking about how kids interact with their spaces, but also just dance as a metaphor that it allows you to be in a space at one time in this certain place that is free. And there's something about the reign of King Cole that's felt stifling. It's felt like, the beating of the drum. It's the same reason why our score is largely percussion and not, old time Appalachian music. I really wanted this sort of industrial style score with my composer Bobak, who does incredible work. And so we wanted to break those sort of structures that have been put up and the limitations that have been put up and recognize both the positive and negatives that have come from this experience we've come from. And I see dance as like the most simple form of expression of an individual finding their own path, running their own way. And so, yeah, there's a lot to say on that, but those are two things that I felt were really important. Is, you know, you may not actually go to Appalachia yourself. So I hope that in some way this film can transport you there beyond just facts and figures and information, but, you know, maybe you have a little bit better of a feeling of what it's like to stand on a foggy mountain, you know, and look at that and hear the birds and think about that. Because these are all the things in a resource extraction economy you're seeing for, you know, in the film, I think I have the line of like, we're seen as the value of a ton, or like how much a ton weighs or costs is what our value is. But for me, like all the other treasures around us are also things that we've sort of had to, you know, cut off ourselves from in some capacity to do this work that was benefiting this industrial revolution and everything else. So I just kind of wanted to bring everything back in. And I guess one other thing I would say is that the moment she's in the mine and she touches the moss that's underground and she transports to the moss forest, you know, a lot of people see that as sort of like this dystopian, utopian thing. And that's really not the intention, although I would definitely own up to some like intense sound design in there where you would think that. But the intention was to remind people of what the origins of coal are, which is forests, which is trees, right? That's what this is. That's what we're talking about, right? When we look at coal, that's what it is. And so this idea that we are just but a small story in this larger grand unfolding, and the magic of that, like the mystery behind what's next and what we've come from. So
Thank you so much, Elaine.
yeah. Thank you all.
That's a wrap for our program tonight. The Climate Film Festival is coming up September 20th through 22nd. We do have our open call open till June. So if you have any filmmaker friends or are filmmakers yourself, please submit. It's on our website, climatefilmfest.com. And we'll be available in the lobby if you have any questions. Elaine, thank you again so much. Thank you once more to Asia Society for hosting this and their incredible coal and ice exhibition upstairs. Go check it out.
Bye.
Have a great night.
Thank you.